Well, how often have you heard the question asked, is Big Brother watching you? Well, chances are Big Brother is. I mean, there are cameras everywhere, but are there microphones everywhere? Is it just Big Brother watching you? Are there corporations watching you through your phone, through your TV? With every stroke of a keyboard, somebody knows what you're doing. But here is an interesting story about the Australian government. A government bill to create new police powers to spy on criminal suspects online and then be able to disrupt their data and take over their accounts has been passed with the support of the Australian Labor Party. The Identify and Disrupt Bill, it passed the Senate this week on Wednesday. This is despite concerns about the low bar of who can authorise a warrant, and that the government failed to implement all the safeguards recommended by the Bipartisan Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. Now, basically, this bill creates 3 new types of warrants to enable the AFP and the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission to modify and delete data. It enables them to take over accounts and to spy on Australians in networks suspected of committing crimes. Now, you remember back in August, there was a Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. It was actually chaired by the Liberal Senator James Paterson, and they made a series of recommendations to improve oversight and safeguards. Well, this week, folks, the Home Affairs Minister, Karen Andrews, introduced amendments to implement some of the proposed safeguards, including a sunset clause, so the new powers would expire after 5 years, and stronger criteria to issue warrants. Now, I haven't got a problem with the government spying on people who are suspected of criminal behaviour. But how do they find these people? And how do we know that you and I aren't just going to be looked at because maybe they suspect something? I've always been a big believer, if you've got nothing to hide, it doesn't matter. But is this taking cybercrime and spying and big brothering to a new level? And exactly what safeguards are put in place so that this information cannot be abused from somebody within the system? Our alternate media guy is Bob, and he wants to talk about it. He's online right now. G'day, buddy.
Hey, how are you, Luke?
I'm very, very good, Bob. Tell us about this bill that was passed on Wednesday, the Identify and Disrupt Bill, it's called. Explain it to us.
Yeah, so basically what it does is allows the government who suspects anybody of committing a crime to infiltrate their devices, so it'd be an iPhone or an iPad or a computer or whatever it may be, download the data. They can modify the data that's on the phone or iPad or whatever it may be, which we'll get to in a sec, and they can also take over the account and impersonate you to incriminate or to track other people. Now, the biggest problem I have with this, or the biggest question I have is first of all, it's what's a criminal? We saw 136, I think it was, arrests for the New South Wales protest that happened last weekend, I think it was. So the biggest question is are they criminals? Is that what's set as the bar for a criminal? Like me, I regularly ring in, talk to you. Obviously, I live in this sort of security conscious world. Am I considered a criminal because of, for example, me talking about the government's tracking and monitoring processes?
Exactly. So here's alternate news Bob, who's been with us for 4 years. Is he then going to be considered a criminal if he is critical of government policy, for example? Where does our freedom of speech start and finish? Now, Bob, let's just go back to, when was it, June, when we heard that there was this huge international sting because the FBI, with the help of the AFP, they set up their own encrypted platform. Remember this? It was used by hundreds of criminals around the world. It was an unprecedented sting operation that led to more than 800 arrests in 18 countries. And it was an operation by the FBI, the Australian Federal Police, the European Police, and it snared suspects in Australia, in Asia, in Europe, South America, the Middle East. It was all unbelievable. And this was incredibly clever. It was a secure, encrypted messaging app which they convinced criminals to use and trust. Now, all that was done very, very covertly. Now, they wouldn't have been able to catch all those criminals if they'd made a big fuss about this. So where do you draw the line between covert, getting results, and Big Brother stepping too far? You with me?
Yeah, well, that's the question. Like, at the end of the day, I'm familiar with. I'm pretty sure if we're talking about the same thing, it was to do with minors and stuff like that. If that's the case, I'm all for that. I'm all for the government arresting those people, right? They're obviously criminals. You know, anybody that's endangering other people through, those sort of actions, or drugs, or trafficking or whatever. I'm all for monitoring their stuff. But where I draw the line is okay, well, what's a criminal? We saw over in the US, that the Trump's campaign was spied on by these FISA warrants that came out that were basically used of fake information, was used to get these FISA warrants to spy on Carter Page, not Carter Page, Trump's left-hand man, I forget his name now. But even in the US, we've had the government abusing power to go through and to monitor and to spy on people that are everyday citizens.
Now, this is the question. Does the end justify the means? And where do your civil liberties start and end?
I think it depends on the criminal that you're going after. And this is where I would have much rather this sort of stuff. Like, if we have to set up some sort of FISA court like what the US has, obviously a bit better than what they've got, they just got to stamp everything. But if we had to set up some FISA court where it's like, hey, this guy's a trafficking people, or this guy's sending 400 kilos of heroin into our ports every year, whatever it may be, that's something that there's some sort of oversight. I think that would have been a far better idea than just the government being able to sort of say, well, hey, we think this guy's a criminal. It's like, okay, well, but what's the criminal? Are they going to use these new powers to go through and to spy on the protesters who were at these Victorian or New South Wales protests? And are they going to start taking over their accounts so that they can start entrapping other people? I've got people that are like journalists. I've got people that feed me. I've got contacts and stuff, right? I've got contacts that are currently working in with this blockade for the truck drivers. Now, at the end of the day, they're not participating, but they're associated with it.
So you get fed information, and you're concerned that if the government thinks, oh, hang on, Bob here could be a threat to national security, even if you're clearly not, but it's a bit like WikiLeaks. Say, Bob, who's like WikiLeaks here, let's keep an eye on him, and then all of a sudden all your contacts, they're exposed as well.
Yeah, and we've seen this in Australia in the past. We saw these journalists who were arrested wasn't arrested, but raided at 3 a.m. because they were trying to talk about the Australian government with the Papua New Guinea deal. I think it was the Sunday Morning Herald and a few other papers were raided at 3 a.m. in the morning because they were about to break a story that made the Australian government look bad. So
here's the question. Do we want Big Brother looking after us? If so, Big Brother will argue that they need to look into us. Where do we draw the line? Because that app, that secretly developed and secure encrypted messaging app that enabled the Australian police and the FBI to make over 800 arrests, was absolutely priceless. And they had, and when I first heard of all those arrests, the first thing I thought was, why did they stop? Why have they put their hands up and say, this is what we've done? I believe the reason is because when you're trying to get a prosecution in court, you will have to divulge where you got your evidence from, and it would have all come out there. Correct, Bob?
Maybe, or it could have been also the fact that the criminals were starting to get wise on the situation.
Yeah.
Like I know, for example, with my contacts and stuff like that, I've got contacts in Afghanistan, the US, China, all these sort of places, right? And we use secure communications to contact each other for them to feed me information and stuff. And at the end of the day, I can tell you now, if there was a new app that came up, most of my contacts are going to be very cautious about it. But then if a whole bunch of people start getting arrested or disappearing off my contacts list, then they're going to be pretty suspicious about that particular app that we've all moved to, and all of a sudden everybody's getting arrested. So it could have just been the fact the criminals are starting to work it out. Plus, the FBI and Australian government has a tendency to leak like a sieve. So,
well, they didn't leak for a while. And in fact, these criminals were able to use this encrypted app for quite some time, so they felt quite comfortable with it. And I'm sure there's another one out there. It's always good to talk to you, Bob. You give us something to think about. Thank you for that.
Not a problem, buddy.
What's the latest in Afghanistan?
Oh, boy.
The Taliban's taken over. Biden's pulled out. Is it now completely all over, Red Rover? Are the people of Afghanistan now completely at the mercy of the Taliban?
So the latest thing that came out just literally a few hours ago was apparently Biden was in a conversation in July, and he turned around and said to the president then of Afghanistan, the one who was fleeing with the truckload of cash, that even if the Taliban takes over, you've got to make it seem like they're not. So it looks like Biden was very suspicious that this was all going to go south as much of July. As for the people that are still there, there's anywhere between 100 to 200, my contact's telling me, 100 to 200 people that are still in Afghanistan. The US is talking about donating money to the Taliban. I'm pretty sure that's a way of saying, hey, we've still got people left behind. Give us our men back and we'll give you some extra cash, sort of under the table sort of thing. Because the last thing Biden wants is a PR battle of dead soldiers or dead interpreters on the news.
Well, he's already got that. So anyway, there you are. The forces out of Afghanistan, a 20-year war. Was it worth it? What did we achieve? Did we go in there to stop terrorism? No. You throw what you think is water over terrorism. You're actually throwing oil, and it just spreads. So I think it's achieved absolutely nothing. But there you are, another chapter in the history of the world, and we'll look back and go, Jesus, what were we thinking? Bob, thanks for your call, mate. We'll keep moving.
No problem. Just before we go, I just want to say that even though you and I have been critical of Afghanistan, I want to give full props to all the soldiers who fought.
Yep. I agree.
Look, we might be critical of the regime and the governments and everything like that, but my whole family is military, and I have the utmost respect to all the soldiers who put their lives on the line so that we have our freedoms, well, supposedly have our freedoms. Big, big thank you for every person in the world, because without you guys, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation right now. Exactly.
Well done, Bob. Well said, and I couldn't agree with you more. And to any of our listeners that are returned servicemen from Afghanistan, feel free to ring now on 133353. I want to hear from you. You have been there. You've seen it. You know better than anyone. What do you think the future of Afghanistan is? If you've been to Afghanistan and you've served, and what Bob said, I concur a million times. Thank you for your service. But what do you make of it? What do you think will happen? I'd love to hear your thoughts. 133353. We are opening the phone lines for general conversation. There's a lot to talk about.